everyone, it's Andrea from the team at We Love Baking. Today I'm going to share with you how I make a traditional British classic, the Bakewell Tart. So to start with, we are going to make our pastry. Now I've already got some pastry that I've pre-made here and I popped it in my fridge and it's nice and cold, but you can very easily make your own, of course, but you can use shop bought as well if that's easier for you. Now I'm going to roll it out and use it to line my tin, but in order to roll it out, I'm going to show you the way I like to do it. So I have here some parchment paper that I'm going to pop on my work surface. This saves you having to use flour and do it that way. If that's what you want to do, that's absolutely fine. But I find this way actually is easier to help me with lining my tin as well. So I'm going to pop my pastry on there. I've just flattened it out a little bit. That's just going to make it a little bit easier for me to roll. And then the cling film that I use to wrap it with is going to go over the pastry. And I'm going to use that as a top layer to roll my pastry through. Now this has been in the fridge, so it is going to be a bit hard, so I'm going to have to bang it out a little just to get it a bit flatter. Brilliant for taking out any stresses you have going on. And then once you have got it a little bit thinner, you can start rolling it out. So once you are done with your pastry, here's the easy bit of lining your tin. So before we do anything else, I want to make sure that it fits my tin. So I obviously wanted to line the bottom and up the side, and I don't mind a bit of overhang because I'm going to cut it off. So I'm going to take my tin and pop it in the middle of your pastry, and if you can see a couple of inches all the way around, you know that it'll come up the sides and leave you a bit of overhang, and that is perfect. So that is ready to go. I'm going to show you now how the easiest way is to line your tin. Now that my pastry is all rolled out, I'm going to grab my parchment and my cling film and flip the whole thing over so the cling film's on the bottom, like that. Peel my parchment off, and that is going to go into my tin. So let me set that aside for a moment. I'm going to need that again in a second. But having it on the cling film makes it really easy to pick up and to handle without having it stick to my hands or stick to a rolling pin and need loads of flour, anything like that. So all I'm going to do is get my tin ready, support it underneath, and then I'm just literally going to drop it over the top, like so. Once it's over, we're going to ease it down all the way around, and then you can start pushing it into the ridges of your tin to get that lovely shape of the tart. Make sure you've pushed it all the way down the bottom and all the way into the corners as well, just to make sure that you get nice sharp edges at the bottom of your tart. We are ready then to take our cling film off. I'm going to grab my tin and use a knife to just cut all the way along and get rid of all this excess pastry on top. There we go, and that's my tart all lined and ready to go. Once I've done this, I'm just going to use a fork to prick the bottom of my base. Now, pricking the bottom of your pastry base lets the moisture and the steam from the pastry evaporate and get released, which means your pastry isn't going to rise in the middle, giving you more space for your filling. Now it's time to get baking. So while I've been preparing this, my oven has been preheating behind me. It's been preheating at 180 Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit. Now this, I'm going to blind bake first. If you don't know what blind baking is, it's simply baking it so the pastry is basically not visible. So there's a few different ways to do it, a few different tools you can use, but I'm going to bring back that parchment paper that I used to roll before. I'm going to scrunch it up. And once you have scrunched it all up, open it up again. And what the scrunching does is it makes it really flexible, so it's going to get in all the grooves of your pastry really easily. So that is going to line my pastry case, like so. Now, you can use something like baking beans if you have them to line your tin, and what that does is it puts some weight on the pastry so the pastry doesn't puff up while it's baking. So it keeps its shape, it holds its shape and sets it, if you like, before we brown the pastry a little bit later. But what I'm going to use instead of baking beans is some rice. Now this is uncooked rice. It's just your normal basmati rice that you can get in the store. Obviously use uncooked rice. It's not going to affect the rice at all, so you can absolutely use this rice again in the future if you want to do for some other cooking. But this is going to provide some weight on there so that my pastry doesn't rise while it's baking. So you want to fill it fairly near the top because you want as much weight as possible on your pastry and push it into the edges as well to make sure that the edges don't start to collapse in as it's baking, as it gets warm in the oven. Now you can also use things like dried beans. You can absolutely use baking beans. I prefer rice because the smaller grains don't cause craters in my pastry. So this gives me the nicest, smoothest bake, if you like, on my pastry. So that is now ready. I'm going to pop that in my oven for 15 minutes just to blind bake it, and then we will finish it off, which means just removing the rice and the baking paper for another 10 minutes or so to get it nice and golden. So while my pastry is baking, I'm going to start making my filling. With my Bakewell Tart, you're going to have the pastry, you're going to have a layer of jam. I'm just using a shop bought jam just for ease today, but I'm going to make the frangipan. Now the frangipan is the kind of cakey, almondy bit that's the layer within your Bakewell. So we're going to prepare that. So into a mixing bowl, I'm going to pop in some unsalted butter. And to that, I am going to add some sugar. Now today I am using Tate & Lyle's golden caster sugar. You can use regular caster sugar if you like as well. I prefer the golden actually in this instance because it gives a very subtle, lovely caramel flavour to the frangipan, which I really like. I think that really works really well with the pastry and the jam and everything else. This sugar dissolves really easily and it leaves a really lovely sweet aftertaste of all the sugars that I've tried in the past. So I'd highly recommend using Tate & Lyle's caster sugar for this bake. So I'm going to measure it out. I need 150 grams of this sugar. There we go, 150 grams all measured out. Set that aside, and this is going to now get mixed together like you do with making a cake. It's going to go, I want it to be really well combined and nice and fluffy. So once your butter and sugar are combined and they've started to go a little bit paler, we're going to move on. So to this I'm going to add 2 eggs. I like to mix my eggs in one at a time. I just find they blend a lot better that way. So, right, and once those are mixed in, I'm just going to add in the final few ingredients. So a frangipan is almonds, so I'm going to add in some ground almonds. And to that, just to enhance the almond flavour, I'm going to add a little bit of almond extract as well. And my last ingredient is a little bit, just a tablespoon's worth of plain flour. So before I mix it all together, I'm just going to scrape my bowl down, just to make sure everything combines. And then we'll give it one last mix, and our frangipan is ready to be used. And that's it, done. So that is now ready. My pastry is just finishing up in the oven. So it's time to get that out and start putting it all together. Right, so my tart case is out of the oven. You can see the bottom of it is just starting to go golden after I uncovered it from the blind baking, and the edges are beautifully golden. That's exactly what I want. And the reason I baked it before I put any of my filling in is so that I don't get a soggy bottom. So into my pastry case, first I'm going to put some jam. Now when you put your jam in, you want to make sure that it doesn't go all the way to the edges, because you don't want what will happen in the oven is the jam will start to bubble up and then it'll come up around the side and you'll get an untidy finish to your Bakewell tart. So when you put your jam in, you want to actually spread it so that it's not quite all the way to the edge. So once your jam is done, we are going to pop the frangipan that we made earlier in. Now I have just transferred my frangipan into a piping bag. I find it much easier to do it that way because if I just spoon it on and spread it out, I find it mixes up with my jam, which is what I don't want to do. So I'm going to pipe this all the way around and then level up the top, which I find gives a much cleaner finish. So while I'm doing this, let me tell you a little bit about a Bakewell tart. Normally, a traditional Bakewell tart, I should say, actually doesn't have an icing layer over the top, which is what is commonly associated with it. It's actually the mini ones, the cherry Bakewells that you get. So this one I'm making more like a traditional Bakewell. So you've got your jam and you've got your frangipan, and then actually what goes over the top is just quite simply some flaked almonds. So whilst I've been preparing this part of the filling, I've left my oven on. I'm just going to pop some flaked almonds across the top of this tart, and then that's going back in the oven. So once you're happy with your layer, we're going to pop that back in the oven, and that's going to bake up so that the filling is all nice and set. So this is going to bake, and I shall see you on the other side with a baked Bakewell tart. And there you have it, a traditional British Bakewell tart. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you have, and do join us next time. Happy baking.